Somewhere on the edge of a dying trade moon, two suns are setting at once. The sky turns orange. Then smoke. A transport ship is falling, not landing, falling, carving through a crowded marketplace, like something the universe decided to discard. Metal screaming, stalls collapsing, people running in every direction except one. One man runs toward it. He doesn't hesitate, doesn't slow down. The fire is already spreading and the hull is already groaning, and none of that stops him. He disappears into the smoke. He comes out carrying two people he has never met. He sets them down, checks that they're breathing, looks once, just once, at a small child with violet eyes who is holding on to him like he is the only solid thing left in the world. Then he walks away. No name, no explanation, just gone. What he doesn't know, what he can't possibly know, is that the child never stops looking. Part 1. A good soldier knows when to leave. The soup was gray, not gray like storm clouds, not gray like morning fog over a quiet field, gray like something that had given up, like it had started out as something else entirely and just stopped trying. Kale Morrow stared at it, then he ate it anyway. Because food was food, because credits were low, because the whey farmer was sitting 3 docks over with a cracked primary coupling and a secondary drive that sounded like a dying animal every time he tried to start it. Because parts cost money he didn't have yet. Because he'd been on this rock for 2 weeks already, and he'd be here at least 2 more. Because that was just how things were. Suradek was not the worst place Kale had ever been. That was a low bar. He'd spent 3 months in a forward surgical unit on a moon with no atmosphere and a heating system held together with wire and prayer. He'd spent 6 weeks in a refugee processing station that smelled like engine fuel and despair. He'd spent 1 very bad night in a holding cell on a station whose name he'd already forgotten, arrested for the crime of helping someone he probably shouldn't have helped. Compared to all of that, Suradek was fine. It was a trading moon, mid-size, mid-everything really. The kind of place that existed because it had to exist. Because ships needed fuel and crews needed food, and the galaxy needed somewhere to put all the things being moved from one place to another. 2 suns hung low in the sky outside the cantina window, painting the marketplace in shades of orange and dust. Kale had a table in the corner. He always found the corner table. 8 years of field medicine had trained certain things into his body that therapy had not trained out. Corner tables, clear sight lines to exits, the habit of counting people when he walked into a room, the habit of noting who was carrying what, the habit of never sitting with his back to a door. His therapist back on Earth had called it hypervigilance. Kale called it Tuesday. He watched the marketplace through the dirty window. Aliens of a dozen species moved between the stalls. A merchant with 4 arms was arguing with a buyer who had no visible mouth, the negotiation happening entirely through hand gestures and a small translation device that beeped every few seconds. 2 children species Kale didn't recognize, small and quick with iridescent skin, chased something through the crowd and knocked over a display of dried fruit before disappearing into the chaos. Normal. All of it completely normal. He pushed the gray soup away. 34 years old, brown hair with threads of gray starting at the temples. Hands that were rough from work and scarred from things he didn't think about during daylight hours. Eyes that had seen enough that they didn't open very wide anymore. Not because he was tired, because he was careful. 8 years as a combat medic in the Earth Defense Corps had taught him that carrying too much, too fast, too wide, it cost you. It cost you in ways that didn't show up on a medical chart. He'd gone in at 22 young and fast and believing in things. He'd come out at 30 with a different relationship to belief. He still believed in some things, just fewer of them, and more quietly. The war with the Valthari had ended 4 years ago. Official ceasefire, signed documents, handshakes photographed for history. The diplomats had called it peace. The soldiers had called it something else, something that didn't have a clean word. Kale had done his exit interview, filed his paperwork, packed his bag, and then he'd bought the whey farmer from a retiring hauler on Kestrel Station and started moving things from one place to another. Simple work, honest work, the kind of work that left his hands busy and his mind mostly quiet. Mostly. He had a list, not written down anywhere, just in his head. Names. 12 of them. He read them before he slept most nights. Not all of them. Some nights he was too tired. Some nights he fell asleep mid-name and woke up guilty about it. His therapist had told him the list was unhealthy. He hadn't gone back after that. The names weren't a punishment. He wasn't doing it to hurt himself. He did it because someone had to remember. Because a name forgotten is a person erased. Because those 12 people had mattered, and the universe had moved on from them with the kind of indifference that made Kale want to put his fist through something soft. So he remembered them. It was the least he could do, and he was very good by now at least. Outside the window, one of the twin suns touched the horizon. The other still hung mid-sky. It was almost peaceful in the particular way that places with low expectations were peaceful. Nobody on Suradek wanted very much. Nobody was pretending to be something they weren't. Kale appreciated that. He had begun to think about getting back to the dock, checking on the wayfarmer, maybe negotiating again with the parts dealer who'd quoted him a number 3 days ago that had made him laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was crying. And then he heard it, a sound like the world ending. Brief, immediate, final. The explosion came from somewhere in the market close enough that the cantina windows rattled in their frames. The gray soup sloshed. The overhead light flickered. Kale was on his feet before his brain had finished processing the sound. Not a decision, not heroism. His body just moved. 8 years of surgical units, 8 years of running toward the sound of screaming. Because that's where the work was, it had become something below thought. Something in the muscle and the bone. He was through the cantina door before anyone else had fully registered what had happened. Outside was chaos. A transport ship mid-size Cathari registry markings. He cataloged this automatically and without interest had come down hard across the main market corridor. Not a landing, a fall. The kind of fall that happened when something critical failed all at once and physics took over from engineering. It had carved a path through 3 stalls and come to rest against the stone foundation of a storage building. One wing crumpled inward, the nose buried in debris. Fire, engine section spreading, black smoke rising in a column that turned the orange sunset gray. People were running. Of course they were running. Running was the correct response. Running was smart. Running was survival. Kale ran the other way. He was aware dimly that he was doing it again. The thing he always did. The thing that had gotten him arrested once, thanked twice, and had never once felt like a choice. He was aware that the fire was getting bigger, that the metal of the transport was making sounds that metal made when it was close to structural failure, that his chances of getting out of this without burns or worse were not what a sensible person would call good. He was aware of all of this. He kept running. The heat wall hit him 10 meters from the ship. Real heat. The kind that dried your eyes instantly and made the air hurt to breathe. He pulled his jacket up over his nose and mouth, found the breach in the transport side, a section where the hull had peeled back on impact and went through. Inside. Smoke, thick and acrid and immediately present in his lungs. He dropped lower, moved faster. The passenger cabin was aft of the breach, which meant moving through the cargo section, first stepping over scattered containers and a split cargo net and something that had been ceramic once and was now just a lot of small, sharp pieces on the floor. He heard crying. Small, high, desperate. He followed it. The passenger cabin had partially collapsed. One section of the overhead had come down, and the emergency lighting was half functional, which meant everything was half visible and twice as disorienting. He scanned fast. Medical training triage left to right closest first. The woman was on the floor near the forward bulkhead. Tall, lean, blue skin, smooth, and faintly luminescent. Even in this light, the way certain Cathari looked, though Kale had seen very few Cathari up close in his life. She was unconscious, breathing. He crossed to her in 4 steps and ran a quick assessment. Broken ribs, maybe 2, maybe 3. Breathing was shallow but not absent. Head wounds superficial, a lot of blood because head wounds did that, but not the kind that killed you immediately. Internal bleeding was possible, probable. She needed a medical center, not a cargo hold on fire. But first, the crying. He found her behind what had been a passenger seat, now a crumpled wreck of structural material that had half toppled sideways. A piece of the collapsed overhead section had come down across her legs, not heavy enough to shatter bone, heavy enough to pin her completely. She was small, 4 years old maybe just turned 5. Blue skin like the woman's same faint luminescence. Same high cheekbones that would be regal when she was older. But her eyes were different from what he expected. Violet. Large and violet and currently full of the specific terror that children hold when the world has stopped making sense and the people who were supposed to keep them safe are down and not moving, and there is fire and smoke and noise and nothing makes any sense. She looked at him. He looked at her. She screamed, not at him specifically, just at everything. The scream of a child who has run out of other options. Kyle dropped to his knees in front of her. Low, non-threatening. He had learned this not in medical training, but in those particular nightmarish hours in field units when families showed up looking for people he sometimes couldn't save. And he'd had to deliver that news to children who were old enough to understand and not old enough to survive understanding. Get low, stay calm, don't reach first. Hey, he said quietly. Underneath the crackling fire and the groaning metal and the distant sounds of emergency services beginning to arrive outside. Hey, look at me. She looked, tear-streaked face, lower lip trembling, eyes that contained the specific question all children ask in disasters and that no adult has ever been able to answer satisfactorily. Why is this happening? I'm going to get you out, Cale said. Same quiet, same steady. I need you to stay very still for just a minute. Can you do that? She didn't understand his words. He could see that immediately. The language centers of her expression weren't responding to the content, just to the tone. But tone was enough. Tone was actually most of it. He'd seen that before too, the way a calm voice in a crisis could cross whatever gap the words couldn't. She stopped screaming, still terrified, still trembling, but watching him, waiting. He examined the debris pinning her legs. One major piece, several smaller fragments resting on top of it. The primary piece was the problem, a section of structural paneling, maybe 50 kilos angled in a way that multiplied its effective weight. He'd need both hands and everything he had. He braced, gripped the edge, lifted. His lower back made a strong argument against this. He ignored it. The panel shifted, slowly, grinding. He got it up by maybe 30 centimeters, held it there with his arms shaking, and looked at her. Now move. Come toward me. She understood move, apparently, or she understood his arms. She scrambled forward, pulling herself out from under the panel, crying out once when her ankle caught the edge of something, and then she was clear. And he let the panel drop, and the crash of it hitting the deck sent a new cascade of smoke through the cabin. He scooped her up. She was so light. Children always were. Cale had a theory not medically supported that children weighed less than they looked like they should because some large percentage of them was made of noise and motion. In his arms, she felt like a bird, like something that needed protecting from wind. She buried her face against his shoulder and held on, and held on. He turned back to the woman, still breathing, still unconscious. His assessment of the situation had not improved. He had generously 3 minutes before this section of the transport was no longer structurally compatible with keeping him alive. He needed to move her now, or he didn't move her at all. He made the calculation, shifted the child to one arm pressed firmly against his side. She clung without being told to. He crouched next to the woman and got his free arm underneath her. Lifted, heavier than she looked. Also heavier than his back had been told to expect. But he'd carried wounded soldiers through mud and smoke and gravity fields that weren't quite calibrated right. He'd carried a 19-year-old with 3 broken ribs across 400 meters of contested ground, once back when there was contested ground. He'd carried things he shouldn't have been able to carry because the alternative was leaving them, and that had never been something he could make himself do. He moved, child against his chest, woman over his shoulder, through the smoke, back through the debris field, lower because the smoke was thicker, now hot enough near the ceiling to be dangerous. He found the breach in the hull by memory and muscle, not by sight. He went through. The explosion hit him from behind like a hand, just a massive, invisible hand. He was airborne for a moment that felt much longer than physics would support. then the ground. He tucked old training automatic curled around the child, took the impact on his shoulder and hip, and let the woman roll from his grasp because he couldn't hold both and protect the child and do physics correctly all at the same time. He lay there. The world was very loud and then very quiet. He checked the child first. His hands moved over her before his brain had caught up to what he was doing. Nothing broken. Breathing. Shaken. Her face against his chest, her small hands gripping his jacket with a ferocity that seemed unlikely for the size of her. He checked the woman. Still breathing. Still unconscious. She'd taken the fall on her side and her shoulder, which was going to hurt when she woke up, but was better than the alternative. He sat up, slowly. His ribs had thoughts. His shoulder had more thoughts. His back had an entire philosophical position on what had just happened and was very interested in sharing it. He sat up anyway. The child lifted her face from his chest. Those eyes close up now were extraordinary. The specific shade of purple that existed nowhere in human biology, pigmented with something that caught light the way gems did. Wet with tears, red at the rims, and looking at him the way he hadn't been looked at in a long time. Like he was solid, like he was certain, like in all the chaos and the smoke and the fire, he was the one thing she had decided to trust. "You're okay," he said, not loud. "You're out. You're okay." She reached up. Her small hand touched his jaw, briefly, the way children touch things they weren't sure were real. He heard the emergency response arriving. Voices, footsteps, the particular frequency of official communication devices. They would handle this from here. That was what emergency services were for. He set her down gently on the ground. She immediately reached for him, both hands out. The small universal language of a child who has decided you are the safe thing and is not interested in revising that position. "They're coming," he said. "They're going to help you now. Both of you." He looked toward the woman. She was beginning to show signs of returning consciousness. Slight movements, slight sounds. Good. She needed a hospital, but she was going to make it. He stood. He should leave. He knew he should leave. He'd done what needed doing. Medical teams were arriving. Security was arriving. His job as unofficial, unpaid, entirely self-appointed job was done. He was a stranger on this rock waiting for engine parts. He wasn't anyone's hero. He wasn't anyone's anything. He was just a man who had been in the right place, or the wrong place depending on how you looked at it. He started to turn, and then he saw it. On the child's clothing. High on the collar, partly obscured by soot, but visible enough. A small embroidered symbol. Geometric, precise. A circle with a divided interior rendered in gold thread that had survived the fire better than the fabric around it. He knew that symbol. He'd seen it on Cathari vessels during the war. Not warships, the Cathari had stayed out of the war officially carefully, with the particular neutrality of a power that didn't need to fight because it could simply wait. But their diplomatic vessels had carried that symbol. Their embassies, their official communications. It was a royal seal. Kale stood very still. He looked at the child, at the woman being surrounded now by arriving medics, at the crowd pressing in from all sides, recording devices appearing as they always did, drawn to disaster the way certain insects were drawn to light. He looked back at the child. She was looking at him, just looking, with those eyes, with that expression of total, uncomplicated trust. She had one hand still reached out in his direction, fingers open. He knew what it meant if he stayed. He understood with the particular clarity of a man who had spent years reading situations quickly exactly what kind of story this would become if he stayed. A human soldier. Cathari royalty. A rescue that crossed the lines everyone had spent years drawing very carefully. There would be questions, there would be reports, there would be a diplomatic situation with angles he couldn't calculate and consequences he couldn't predict. He was not equipped for that. He was not the right person for that. He was a cargo hauler with a broken ship, and a table in the corner, and a bowl of gray soup cooling somewhere behind him. He stepped back, just one step, then another. Something small pressed into his hand. He looked down. The child had in the moment before he stepped back In the moment, he hadn't been watching her hands press something into his palm, a small piece of paper, crumpled. She must have been holding it when the crash happened. Children did that, held things. He didn't look at it, not yet. He closed his fingers around it. "You're going to be fine," he said, even though she couldn't understand him, even though the words were mostly for himself. "Both of you are going to be fine." Then he turned and walked into the crowd and kept walking until the crowd had swallowed him completely. He did not run. Running drew attention. He just walked, steadily, into the market through the side passages back toward the dock district where the wave farmer sat with its broken coupling and its dying secondary drive and its very strong opinions about his financial situation. His shoulder hurt. His ribs hurt. His back had given up philosophy and moved on to active grievance. He walked anyway. It wasn't until he was back aboard the wave farmer, sitting in the pilot's seat, with the lights low and the dock sounds muffled by the hull around him, that he opened his hand and looked at what she'd given him. A scrap of paper, small, folded over twice. He unfolded it. The drawing was in wax crayon, blue and orange and a little bit of yellow. The precision of a 4-year-old's hand, which was to say not very much precision at all. But he looked at it for a long time, tilted it slightly, looked again. 2 figures, one tall, one small. The small one's hand was in the tall one's hand. He didn't know what it was supposed to be. It could have been anything. It could have been something she'd been drawing before the crash, something that had nothing to do with him. She'd been holding it. Children held things. But he folded it back, carefully, and put it in the small drawer under the navigation console. The drawer where he kept the things he didn't have a category for. A coin from a planet he'd visited once and never gone back to. A photograph he'd stopped being able to look at and couldn't make himself throw away. 2 buttons from his old uniform. He put the drawing in there, and then he closed the drawer. And then he sat in the dark for a while and didn't sleep. The next morning, Suradek's local news service ran a story about the crash. Transport malfunction. Several injured. 2 survivors pulled from the wreckage by an unknown individual before emergency services arrived. Security footage was blurry, inconclusive, showed a human male medium height, medium build, no identifying features. Kyle didn't watch the news. He was already at the parts dealer arguing about the price of a primary coupling. He did not know, could not have known, had no way of knowing that 3 levels up in Suradek's medical center, a woman with blue skin and silver eyes was waking up in a controlled atmosphere room with machinery breathing around her. She was groggy. She was in pain. She had 3 cracked ribs and a concussion and a deep bruise across her left shoulder from where she'd hit the ground. Her first word when consciousness returned enough for words was not the name of a healer. It was the name of her daughter. She was shown that her daughter was safe, unharmed, sleeping in the next room under careful monitoring. She processed this information with the particular discipline of someone trained since childhood to not show what they felt. Her second question was, who got us out? The medics told her what they knew, which was almost nothing. Human, male, gone before anyone could stop him. She lay back against the pillows and looked at the ceiling. Her face very still. Her hands very still. Everything about her very still in the specific way that indicated the stillness was costing her something. A human had saved her life, saved her daughter's life, and then disappeared without asking for anything, without giving a name, without waiting for a reaction. She requested security footage, all of it, every camera angle from every node in the market district. She studied the footage for 3 hours, blurry, degraded by the fire's interference. A figure in a jacket moving fast, moving with purpose. Brown hair. She couldn't make out a face, not clearly. She called her chief of intelligence, quietly, not through official channels, not logged. Find him, she said. The chief of intelligence had learned over decades of service that when the Queen said, find someone quietly, it meant he did not ask why. He just found them. He said he would get started immediately. In the next room, Princess Sol slept. She was 4 years old. She didn't dream about the fire. She dreamed about the face, the eyes, brown and calm, like something solid in a world that had been made entirely of falling and smoke and noise. She woke up and the face was gone. She asked the healers where he was. They didn't understand her question. She asked them 3 more times, different ways, getting more specific. The human man, the man who held her, the man with the eyes. They told her there was no human man here. She must be confused. She was not confused. She was 4 years old, and she knew exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. And she was considerably more irritated than 4-year-olds were supposed to be. She asked the healers for something to draw with. They brought her crayons, blue and orange and yellow, because those were the colors they had. She drew the face she remembered. Not well. Her hands were 4 years old. They didn't do what she told them, but she drew it anyway. Then she drew the two of them standing together, because that was what had happened. They had been together in the dark, in the fire, and he had not left her until she was safe. She folded the drawing carefully. She put it in the pocket of her robe. And then she drew it again because the first one was gone, because she had to make sure she would always have one. Because the idea of forgetting that face was the most frightening thing she could imagine, and she was 4 years old, and she had just survived a burning transport, and she had very strong feelings about what she was and wasn't going to let herself forget. 4 months passed. The investigation proceeded, quietly, carefully. The chief of intelligence was very good at his job. He found a name, found a registration, found a ship ID for a small cargo hauler operating in the mid-rim territories, found a photograph, not security footage, but an actual photograph from a port registry entry. Brown hair, tired eyes, rough hands visible at the edges of the frame. The chief brought the file to the Queen. She sat at her desk and read it, all of it. The name Cale Morrow, the background Earth Defense Corps, 8 years combat medical honorable discharge. The current occupation cargo transport registered out of Kestrel Station. The current location cross-referenced to a Port Authority record 2 weeks old. The photo. She looked at the photo for a long time, then she looked at the window. Then she placed the file very carefully on the edge of her desk and said 5 words to her chief of intelligence. Stand down. Close the inquiry. He blinked. Once, then arranged his expression into something professionally neutral and said, as you wish, Your Majesty. He left. She sat alone. The file sat at the edge of her desk. She was Queen Varen Solith. She had been crowned at 26. She had ruled for 31 years over a sovereignty of 4 billion subjects across 19 star systems. She had navigated political crises that would have undone lesser rulers. She had made decisions that shaped the lives of billions, and she had made them with the particular clarity of someone who understood that clarity was a skill you cultivated, not a gift you were given. She had not survived 31 years by being someone who let herself owe things to people she didn't understand. A human had saved her life, had saved her daughter's life, and had walked away. That last part was what she couldn't fit into any frame she had. People didn't walk away from her. They presented themselves. They angled for favor. They performed gratitude in hope of reciprocity. They wanted things. Everyone in her experience wanted things. That was the fundamental currency of power, the cataloging of what everyone wanted and the careful control of supply. What did this man want? He had walked away. He hadn't given a name. He hadn't waited. He had simply done a thing and left. She didn't have a file for that. She didn't have a framework for processing it. And she had learned over 31 years that things she couldn't process were things that could destabilize her if she let them in. She was not going to let this in. She had a sovereignty to run. She put the file in the bottom drawer of her desk and locked it. That was the last time she looked at it. Or so she told herself. She was wrong about that, but she didn't find out until later. There was one other thing she did not do. She did not tell the High Council that the investigation had ever existed. She had conducted it through unofficial channels, which gave her the legal latitude to close it the same way. Clean, contained. Her decision, her authority, her silence. What she did not know, could not have known, because she trusted her own intelligence apparatus more than she should have, was that a copy of the file had already been read by someone who was not supposed to have access to it. High Consul Drav Ohen had spent 20 years building small access points into the Queen's intelligence network. Nothing dramatic, Nothing detectable. Just small doors left open for the specific purpose of knowing things before they became surprises. He read the file the same afternoon she did. He closed his copy of it and sat quietly in his office for a while. Then he updated his assessment of several things, made a few quiet arrangements, marked certain contingencies as active. He was a patient man, thorough. He believed in understanding the whole board before you moved any pieces. Cale Morrow was out there somewhere, moving cargo, living quietly. That was fine. That could remain fine. For now. He just needed to know where the piece was. And now he did. Across the Sovereignty's network, a different kind of record was being updated. Not in any official database. Not in any intelligence file. In the private journal of a 4-year-old girl who had learned to write in 3 languages before her 4th birthday, and who is now sitting at the small desk in her room in the palace, with a stack of paper and every color of drawing medium available, and an expression of absolute determination. She drew the face. She drew it until it looked right. She drew it 17 times. She kept the 3 she liked best. She labeled them carefully in her own 4-year-old spelling, in the human language she had heard him speak. She had not understood the words, but she had heard the sounds. She had a good ear. She wrote the sounds down as best she could. They didn't mean anything to her. Not yet. But she kept them anyway, because she was going to find out what they meant. Because she was going to find out everything. Years. Time moved the way it did when you were either very young or very busy, or both in lurches and then long stretches and moments that seemed endless, and transitions that seemed to happen overnight. Soul grew. She was an extraordinary child which everyone around her agreed on, and no one was entirely comfortable about. Too curious, too persistent. The quality that drives tutors to carefully worded complaints to their supervisors. The quality that looks like a problem at 9 and a gift at 30, and the line between those interpretations is mostly just paperwork. She learned human language. In secret because it was easier in secret. Her official tutors taught her Cathari High, Cathari Valthari Common, in the diplomatic pidgin used in the outer territories. Human language was not on the curriculum. Human language was in the view of the Palace Education Committee, not relevant to her development. She found books, she found recordings, she found a translation system that had been decommissioned and was sitting in a storage room 3 levels below the main archive, and she repaired it with her own hands and used it for 2 years before anyone noticed. She was 8 when they noticed. High Consul Drav Ohen noticed. He was not her tutor. He was not her guardian. He was the Queen's chief political advisor, which meant he was present in the palace. Like gravity was present, not always visible, but always operational. He had been doing this job for 20 years. He was precise and thorough and very good at understanding which small things would become large things if left unattended. He noticed Sol's interest in human materials. He said nothing directly. He simply ensured that the materials available to her study period included certain historical accounts, battles, casualty records from the Valthari conflict, the particular tonnage of destruction that a human military engagement could produce. He framed it as balanced education. He watched to see if it worked. She read everything he provided. She also read everything else she could find. And then she came to him, 8 years old, straight-backed, those remarkable eyes absolutely level, and asked him a question that made him recalibrate everything he thought he understood about her. She asked, is it possible for a species that causes harm to also prevent harm? He said that was a very sophisticated question. She said she knew that. She was asking him to answer it. He chose his words carefully and said that it depended on the specific case and the specific individuals involved, and that broad generalizations about any species were epistemologically problematic. She stared at him for a moment. Then she said, I know a specific case, and she showed him one of her drawings. He looked at it. At the 2 figures, one tall, one small hands connected. He kept his face very still. This was something he was better at than almost anyone alive. He said, that's a lovely drawing. She put it back in her journal and thanked him politely and left. He stood in the corridor outside her study room for a moment after she was gone. Then he went back to his office and reviewed everything he knew about a cargo hauler called the Wayfarmer and a human male named Cale Morrow. He updated his files, made a few additional arrangements, marked a few more contingencies. He was a careful man. He believed in preparation. Kyle Morrow was still out there, moving cargo, living quietly. That could remain fine, until it couldn't. Kale did not know any of this. He didn't know about the drawing in the journal. He didn't know about the intelligence file in the locked drawer. He didn't know that his name had been spoken in a palace on a world he'd never seen, or that a child he'd carried out of a burning ship was growing up with his face as one of her fixed stars. He moved cargo. He fixed things that broke. He ate at corner tables and found the exit when he walked into rooms. He kept the drawing in the small drawer under the navigation console. He'd stopped actively thinking about it. It was just there, part of the background, like the photograph he couldn't look at and couldn't throw away. He had a rule about things he couldn't categorize. He held on to them until he understood them. He hadn't made sense of the drawing yet, so he held on to it. That was all. That was completely all. He was not thinking about violet eyes. He was thinking about a faulty coupling in a cargo contract out of Tellus Station that paid better than he'd expected, and whether the gray soup on Calyx 4 was better or worse than the gray soup on Suradek. Slightly worse, was his conclusion. Calyx 4 had done something to it with a spice that had made worse an already difficult situation. He was thinking about soup. He was absolutely thinking about soup and nothing else. Then his comm unit chimed. The contact name read Lena Voss. He looked at it for a moment. Lena. They'd met with the Corps. She'd been a communications specialist. He'd been medical. They'd been stationed on the same orbital platform for 11 months and had become the particular kind of friends that form between people who've been through difficult things in the same room. She'd left service before him, gone into diplomacy. He'd followed her trajectory from a distance, the way you followed the paths of people you respected without wanting anything from them. He hadn't talked to her in 2 years. He answered. I'm going to need you to hear me out before you say no, she said. I haven't said no yet. You were about to, I can tell from the way you answered. He wasn't going to argue with that. What is it? She told him about the Concordia Summit. He'd heard of it. Everyone had. The largest peace negotiation in living history. Dozens of species. A space station built specifically for the occasion. A chance to formally close out the conflicts that had technically ended but practically hadn't. She told him she wanted him there. As what? He said. Medical liaison, cultural advisor, a human being with a working moral compass who can talk to people from other species like they're people. That's not a job. It is at this summit. Everyone's bringing their best military minds and their best political minds. I'm trying to bring something different. Find someone different. Kale. Lena. I need someone I trust. Someone the job won't change. Someone who will be exactly who they are in a room full of people trying to be whoever's most advantageous. He was quiet. I know what you're doing out there, she said more quietly. I know you think the small jobs are enough. Maybe they are. But there's something happening here that's bigger than cargo runs and corner tables. I like corner tables. I know you do. Come anyway. He looked at the navigation console. He thought about the gray soup. He thought about the list of 12 names he read before he slept. He opened the small drawer, took out the folded drawing, held it for a moment, did not open it, just held it. You'll have to send me the details, he said. Does that mean yes? It means send me the details. She sent him the details. He sat in the pilot's seat for a long time after he closed the comm channel. The wayfarmer hummed around him steady and familiar and full of its own accumulated silences. Then he stood up. He went to the small storage compartment in the aft section where his dress uniform had been sitting in a sealed bag for 5 years. He took it out, shook it out. It was dark blue with silver buttons. Clean, pressed, preserved exactly as he'd left it. It was like looking at the costume of a person he used to be. He put it on the hook anyway. He'd wear it. He'd go. He'd stand in the room and be exactly who he was, whatever that was worth. He put the folded drawing in the inside pocket of the jacket. He didn't know why. He didn't need to know why. He just did. Part 2. The Weight of a Moment. Concordia Station was not a place. It was an argument. A physical structural argument made out of metal and glass, and the collective desperation of a dozen species who had run out of other options. It hung in open space like something that had been dreamed by a committee and built by people who'd never met the committee, and the result was enormous and strange and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, beautiful. Kale saw it through the transport window 40 minutes before docking. He sat with his forehead almost touching the glass. Not because he was sentimental, because he was trying to get a sense of the scale and his brain kept rejecting the numbers. Too big doesn't fit. Try again. It didn't get easier when they docked. The main atrium of Concordia Station was large enough to have its own weather. He was not being metaphorical. There were clouds, actual clouds, forming near the upper sections of the ceiling, drifting in the artificial atmosphere, like they were perfectly at home there, which they apparently were. The walls curved upward and inward and were covered in something that caught light differently depending on the angle, so the whole space shifted color as you moved through it. The floor was polished to the kind of mirror finish that made you feel guilty about walking on it. Kale walked on it anyway. He found the corner of the room. Of course he found the corner of the room. The human delegation was small, 50 people. Diplomats, translators, security staff, support personnel. Lena Voss moved through it like she'd built it, which in some way she had. She spotted Kale from across the atrium and crossed to him with the particular stride of someone who had 17 things to tell you and was ranking them in real time. "You came," she said. "You're surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm relieved. There's a difference." "What do you need from me today?" "Today, nothing. Stand around. Look non-threatening. Try not to antagonize anyone." "That's my whole personality, Lena." "I know, that's why I asked you specifically." She squeezed his arm once, moved on, back to the 17 things. He found a position near the edge of the human delegation's designated section. Good sight lines, clear path to 3 exits. Old habits. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and watched the station fill up. They came from everywhere. Every corner of the settled galaxy represented in this room, each delegation more elaborate than the last. Species he recognized. Species he'd never seen before. Species he'd only read about in intelligence briefings that were mostly theoretical. Colors and textures and methods of locomotion that the human visual system had to recalibrate for. He cataloged them without intending to, also an old habit, and then he saw. Not immediately. He was watching a delegation of beings who communicated partly through bioluminescent patches on their shoulders, and it was honestly extraordinary. He was distracted by the extraordinary thing, which was probably why it took him a moment. The Cathari delegation entered through the main ceremonial doors. He heard the change in the room before he saw them, a shift in sound and attention, a collective redirecting that moved through the crowd like a wave. He turned with everyone else. They moved differently from every other delegation. Not faster or slower, just with a different relationship to the space around them. Like the air made way. Like the room understood in some structural sense that these particular beings belong closer to the center of it. White robes, silver accents, blue skin in varying shades, some deep, some pale, and a procession that was clearly ordered by rank without requiring any labels to make that obvious. At the front, a woman, tall, silver crown, white robes that moved like water even when she wasn't moving. A face arranged into the specific expression of someone who had been performing composure for 30 years and had gotten very good at it. Silver eyes that scanned the room in a way that looked polite and was actually comprehensive. Queen Varen Soleth. Kyle had read the briefing documents. He knew who she was. He looked at her the way you looked at a historical fact when it became physical, with the slight cognitive dissonance of something that existed in 2 categories at once. And then he saw the child beside her. Small. 9 years old, though, she carried herself like someone had told her once to stand straight, and she decided to be extremely committed to the assignment. Blue skin, hair dark and pulled back, dressed in a smaller version of the queen's formal robes. And eyes. Violet. Large and violet, and currently, as of this moment, as of right now, moving across the room with a focus that was completely unlike the polite observation of the adults around her. She wasn't looking at the room. She was looking for something in the room. There was a difference. The first is passive. The second has a destination. Kale watched her scan. Something in his chest did something he didn't have a name for. He knew those eyes. He knew immediately, completely, with the absolute certainty of a body that remembered things before the brain caught up, that he knew those eyes. That he had looked into those eyes in the dark, in the smoke 5 years ago, and told them it was going to be okay. No, not possible. The galaxy had what? Hundreds of inhabited systems, billions of beings. He was a cargo hauler from Kestrel Station. She was a Cathari princess. The mathematical probability of this particular intersection, she stopped scanning. Her gaze landed on him. And that was it. That was completely, absolutely, the end of the argument. She went still, all 9 years of her. The kind of stillness that was the opposite of calm, the stillness of something that has been moving for a very long time and has suddenly, without warning, arrived. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair. Her eyes went very wide. The lower lip just slightly beginning to go the way lips went when something enormous was happening. She was trembling. From across the room, across all that polished floor and all those delegations and all that accumulated significance, a 9-year-old girl was trembling and looking at him like she'd been looking for 5 years, because she had. He knew it. He knew it the way you knew something that wasn't information, that wasn't logic, that was just true. She reached up and said something to the queen beside her. Kale couldn't hear it. He watched Varen's face. He watched Queen Varen Solith, who had ruled for 31 years, without once in any publicly recorded instance, losing control of her expression, lose control of her expression. Just for a moment. Just 1 second where 31 years of practiced composure stepped aside for something underneath it. She turned and looked across the room. She found him with her eyes, silver meeting brown, across the width of Concordia Station's grand atrium, across the entire geopolitical weight of a galactic peace summit, across 5 years of not quite forgetting. The room went quiet, in a way rooms go quiet when something important is about to happen, and everyone can feel it, but no one knows what it is yet. Queen Varen Soleth rose from her seat. The Cathari nobles around her went rigid with shock. She didn't stand for people. People stood for her. This was not a small distinction. This was a 31-year established fact of how the universe was organized. She descended from the royal platform. The crowd parted. Nobody told it to. It just did. She walked, straight-backed, robes moving, crown catching the light at each step. She walked through the open space that appeared before her like the universe had decided this was going to happen and had started rearranging the furniture early. She stopped in front of Kyle, close, closer than he'd expected, taller than him by an inch. Silver eyes that up close were not silver, exactly more like the color of light reflected off deep water, shifting and present and absolutely focused on his face. "You," she said. It came out quiet, almost private, like the word had been waiting somewhere for a long time and only now had been allowed to arrive. Kale opened his mouth, nothing immediately available. "You saved my daughter's life," she said. "You saved mine." He cleared his throat. "I did what anyone would have done." "No." Simple. Final. "You did not do what anyone would have done. We were strangers. We were not your kind. You had no reason to help us." "I had the only reason that matters," he said. "You needed help." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not because it was complicated, because it was too simple, because it was the expression of something completely undefended, which was the last thing he'd expected to find on a queen's face. "And then you left," she said. "Yes? You asked for nothing." "There was nothing to ask for. You didn't even give your name." He didn't have an answer for that, so he said, "No, I didn't." She looked at him for another moment. Then she said very quietly, "Why?" And the whole room was listening. He knew the whole room was listening. He was aware with a particular peripheral clarity that came from years of being in situations where awareness was survival, that every recording device in Concordia Station's grand atrium was currently pointed at him, that this moment was being seen by every delegation in the room, that whatever he said next was going to become part of the record. He thought about the smart thing to say, the diplomatic thing, the thing that would serve the summit and manage the situation and give everyone present a narrative they could work with. Then he said the true thing instead, because you needed help and I could give it. That's the whole reason. Where I come from, that's the whole reason. Varen looked at him. And then she did something that sent an audible shock through the room, a collective intake of breath from hundreds of beings simultaneously. She bowed. Not a diplomatic nod, not a polite inclination. A real bow. The queen of the Cathari sovereignty. 31 years on the throne, bowed to a human cargo hauler with a bad shoulder and a dress uniform he'd worn twice. And then, from behind her, around the edge of her robes, moving fast and small and absolutely not waiting for permission. Soul, 9 years old and running like she'd been waiting 9 years to do exactly this, and she was not going to walk. She crossed the open space and crashed directly into Kale's legs like a small missile that had been extremely clear about its target. Her arms went around him. Her face went into his uniform. "Thank you," she said, muffled by the fabric. Then she pulled back enough to look up at him and said it again directly, clearly in English, in his language. "Thank you for saving us. I never forgot you. I looked for you. Every day I looked. I knew I would find you again." He looked down at her, at those eyes, close up now. The same eyes. Exactly the same. Just 5 years older and 5 years wiser and 5 years full of a search he hadn't known was happening. He went down to one knee, not because he was supposed to, because it was the right height for a conversation with a 9-year-old. "I remember you too," he said. "You do, I do." He paused. "You gave me something. Before I left. Do you remember?" She blinked. Then her eyes went wide. "The drawing." "Yes." "You kept it." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. The folded paper, worn at the edges now, soft from 5 years of being in a drawer and occasionally being held without being opened. He unfolded it. He placed it in her small hands. Sol looked at the crayon drawing she'd made at 4 years old, blue and orange and yellow. 2 figures, one tall, one small, hands connected. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at him, and her face did something that was too much to look at directly, so he looked at the drawing instead. "I didn't know," he said, "what it was when you gave it to me. I couldn't tell." "It's us," she said. "I know that now." The room was perfectly, completely silent. And then it wasn't. The voice came from the Cathari Royal platform, not loud. It didn't need to be loud. Concordia Station's acoustics were designed for exactly this kind of moment, every word landing with perfect clarity in every corner of the room. "This is what we've been led here for." High Consul Drav Ohen stepped forward. Kale looked up. He recognized the voice before he recognized the face. The voice from the corridor earlier, the man who'd walked past the human delegation section with a glance that had contained more information than a glance should. Kale had cataloged him without knowing why. Old habit. Now he knew why. Drav Ohen was tall and lean, with the particular leanness of someone who'd spent decades doing nothing that wasted energy. His skin was deep blue. His eyes were dark in a way that had nothing to do with color. He spoke without raising his voice, which made everyone lean forward to catch it, which was the point. A human soldier, in our Queen's court, reduced to a symbol. He moved to stand at the edge of the platform, not descending, staying above. The position was calculated. For 31 years, our Queen has led the sovereignty with clarity and strength. Tonight, we are asked to accept that she was saved by a representative of the species responsible for the war that killed. He paused just long enough, so many of our allies, and that she kept this knowledge from the Cathari High Council for 5 years. Silence of a different kind now. "I ask the Queen with great respect," and his tone made great respect sound like something else entirely. "What else has been kept from the Council in the interest of managing this particular debt?" Varen's face. Still. So still. Kale stood. Slowly. Sol was still holding the drawing. She looked between him and Drav Ohen with an expression that was too old for 9 and exactly right for the person she was. "The Queen suppressed an intelligence investigation into this individual. Ohen continued, calm, careful, a man who had prepared this moment in advance and was simply executing the preparation. That investigation was ordered through unofficial channels. It was closed through unofficial channels. The High Council was not informed. I am informing them now. He looked directly at Varen. A queen who operates outside the council's knowledge is doing her job. Varen's voice came out flat and level and completely without the warmth it had held a moment ago. Just the other version of her, the 31-year version. A queen who conceals alliances. There is no alliance. Then what is this? He gestured. At Kale, at Soul, at the drawing, at the whole scene. What is this? The question landed in the room and sat there. Kale looked at Ohen. Something was wrong. Not in the way that things went wrong by accident. In the way that things went wrong because they'd been arranged to go wrong. He could feel it the same sense he'd had in field units when a situation had too many moving parts that all somehow pointed the same direction. This had been prepared. He just didn't know for what yet. But he was starting to. 2 hours later, Lena Voss found him in a conference room he hadn't agreed to be in. She had 4 other people with her, human delegation members, the kind of people who wore their anxiety in their jaw muscles. I need you to understand the situation, she said. I understand the situation. The Cathari conservative bloc is threatening to withdraw from the summit. I understood that part. If they withdraw, the whole thing falls apart. I understand that part too. She looked at him. Kale. Don't. There's a version of this where you issue a statement, a diplomatic statement, contextualizing the incident, expressing regret for any any what? Any disruption. He looked at her. I'm not going to express regret for pulling 2 people out of a burning ship. I know, obviously, nobody's asking you to. The framing would be, well, Lena, quiet, flat. What are they actually asking me to do? She stopped. He waited. Step back, she said, from the public eye for the duration of the summit. Let the diplomats manage the narrative. And if I do that, then Ohen doesn't have a focal point for his argument. He doesn't need me as a focal point. He's arguing about the queen. I'm just the excuse. You're a very visible excuse. He stood up. I'll think about it, he said. He didn't think about it. He walked. Concordia Station was big enough to get lost in intentionally, and he did. Through service corridors and observation decks and sections that were technically open to all delegations and were therefore occupied by no one in particular. He walked until the sound of the summit faded to a low hum behind the walls. He found an observation gallery, long window, stars, the specific silence that space provided when you remembered it was there. He sat down on a bench that had been placed there for exactly this purpose. He stared at the stars. He was still staring when a small figure sat down next to him. He looked over. Soul, 9 years old, formal robes, completely alone, which meant she had definitely left without telling anyone, which meant there was currently a search happening somewhere on this station that she was deliberately not participating in. You're going to get in trouble, he said. Yes, she agreed, unbothered. Your mother's room is currently occupied. She said it with the particular precision of someone who had checked. I have maybe 12 minutes. He looked at her. She looked back. Can I ask you something? She said. You're going to anyway. Yes. She folded her hands in her lap. When you ran toward the ship, that night, did you see the way out first? He was quiet. I read about how people respond to emergencies, she said in the conversational tone of someone who had read about a lot of things and had no embarrassment about that. There's a window, after the first shock, where you can still choose. Yes, he said. I saw it. The way out. Yes? And you went in anyway. Yes. She considered this, not like it was new information, like it was confirmation of information she'd already had. I thought so, she said. Does it matter? It matters to me. She reached into a pocket in her robes and withdrew a small book, compact, hand-sized. The cover was worn at the corners in the specific way of something carried everywhere and consulted often. I want to show you something. She opened it. The pages were dense with writing. Two languages, sometimes three, switching mid-sentence in the natural way of someone who thought in multiple tongues. Notes in the margins, small drawings. Pressed between two pages, a dried piece of something he couldn't identify. She found the page she wanted. I learned your language, she said, starting when I was 5. She said it without any particular pride, just statement of fact. I started with this word. She turned the book so he could see it. At the top of the page, in careful lettering, a single word in English, neighbor. Below it, a definition written in Cathari first, then translated into English in a slightly different hand, the handwriting of someone a little older. Anyone who needs help that you can give. I found it in an old human text, she said. A very old one. They were talking about who counted as a neighbor. And the answer, she tapped the page, was not about geography, not about who lived closest. It was about who needed something you could provide. He looked at the word. I decided, she said, that this was the word that explained what you did. That night on Suradek, you didn't know us. We weren't your kind. But we needed help that you could give. She closed the book. So we were your neighbors, and you acted accordingly. He didn't know what to say, which was fine because she kept going. I've been thinking about High Consul Owen, she said. Casual, like she was discussing weather. He's been my tutor's supervisor for 4 years. Did you know that? I didn't. He approves the curriculum. She tilted her head. He approved extra study materials for me 2 years ago. Historical records. About your species. About the war. And they were very one-sided. She said it without accusation. Just observation. Which made me curious. Because one-sided information is usually trying to do something. So I found the other side myself. He looked at her. You're 9. Yes. You're doing intelligence analysis at 9. I prefer to call it reading comprehensively. She tucked the book back into her pocket. High Consul Ohin is not afraid of humans, she said. I don't think he is. I think he needs everyone else to be afraid of humans, because fear is useful, and he's very good at useful. The stars outside the window didn't move. They never moved. Or they moved so slowly that the difference was philosophical. Why are you telling me this? Kale said. Because I've had 5 years to think about what kind of person you are, she said simply. And I think you're the kind of person who goes into burning ships. And I think what's happening in there, she gestured vaguely in the direction of the summit, is also a burning ship. He was quiet for a moment. 12 minutes, he said. Probably closer to 8 now. You should go back. Probably. She stood, straightened her robes. Then she looked at him with those remarkable eyes that were exactly as direct at 9 as they had been at 4. A.L. Kale. Kale, she corrected without embarrassment. The people in there are going to tell you that your presence is the problem. That if you just disappeared again, everything would be easier. That seems likely. It's not true. She said it the way she said everything without decoration. The problem was there before you arrived. You're just the part of it they can point at. She paused. You're very easy to point at, because you did something real, and real things are visible. She walked back down the corridor. 8 steps. Then she turned around. I drew your face from memory, she said. For 5 years, hundreds of times. I got better at it. She reached into her pocket again and held out a folded piece of paper. This one was clean. New. I drew it this morning, when I knew we were coming here. Just in case. He took it. She turned and walked back toward the summit. He sat alone. He unfolded the paper. The drawing was extraordinary. Not in the way children's drawings were charming. Extraordinary in the technical objective sense, the skill of someone who had practiced a single subject hundreds of times and had become, without intending to, an expert in it. The face was his. Unmistakably, accurately, carefully his. Brown hair going gray. Tired eyes that were also somehow in the rendering of a 9-year-old who'd been working on this for 5 years kind. She had spent 5 years drawing his face from memory because she hadn't wanted to forget. He sat with that for a while. Then he folded the drawing, put it next to the other one in his inside pocket, and he went back. He found Lena Voss in the corridor outside the main conference area. She was talking to three people simultaneously and managing it by the particular technique of giving each of them the specific 9% of her attention they needed. She saw Kale approaching and excused herself from all three at once. "The Queen has requested a formal proceeding," she said. "Ohen's block is calling for an inquiry into the intelligence suppression. It's essentially a trial," Kale said. "A formal hearing." "A trial." She didn't argue. "Am I allowed to speak at this hearing?" he said. She blinked. "You want to speak? I want to know if I'm allowed to." "Technically, as a name party to the events under discussion you have, yes. You could request the floor." "Kale." "Good." "Kale, you do not have to." "I know I don't have to." "The diplomatic council is advising against—" "I'm not a diplomat, Lena." She looked at him. He looked back. And something in her face shifted, the specific shift he recognized from years ago, when she'd seen him do something she thought was either very right or very wrong, and was reserving judgment until she found out which. "The hearing starts in an hour," she said. "I'll be there." "What are you going to say?" He thought about the gray soup, about the corner table, about 12 names he read before sleeping, about a muffled voice in a burning ship, about a folded piece of paper in a drawer for 5 years, about a 9-year-old girl sitting in a corridor with a worn notebook and a word she'd learned first because she thought it explained everything. "The truth," he said. "Just the truth. I'm not good at anything else." She nodded, once, slow. "Okay," she said. That was it. Okay. Which was, he thought, the right amount of words for this particular moment. He walked toward the hall. The corridor was long and the ceiling was high, and the polished floor reflected everything back at him, the lights, the walls, his own shape moving forward. He didn't look down. He kept walking. Somewhere behind the closed doors of the formal hearing chamber, High Consul Drav Ohen was making his argument. Carefully. Precisely. The way he made everything. The argument had been prepared long before today. That was clear now. That was the thing Kale had felt from the beginning, the sense of a situation too perfectly arranged to be accidental. And somewhere behind a different door, a 9-year-old girl was sitting straight-backed in a chair holding a worn notebook and waiting. He'd pulled 2 people out of a burning ship 5 years ago because it was the only thing to do. He was about to do it again. Different fire. Same reason. The door to the hearing chamber was ahead of him. He pushed it open and walked in. Part 3. What a man leaves behind. The hearing chamber was not built for silence. It was built for argument, for the formal, procedural, carefully orchestrated kind of argument that civilizations used when they wanted to hurt each other without technically starting a war. High ceilings, tiered seating arranged in a half circle facing a central floor. Every surface designed to carry sound clearly. Every angle designed to make the person standing in the middle feel exactly as exposed as they were. Kale walked to the center of it. He stood there, and he looked up. Hundreds of faces, every delegation represented, every species that had come to Concordia for peace, now assembled to watch what peace cost up close. The Cathari block occupied the highest tier on the right, noble faces. Still faces, the particular stillness of people who had decided something and were waiting for the formality to catch up. Drav Ohen sat at the center of them, not standing, seated, composed, the position of a man who had already won and was simply observing the completion of a process he'd set in motion. He had a data tablet. He glanced at it occasionally, not because he needed to, because it signaled that he had documentation, that he had prepared, that this was not emotion, this was evidence. Kale had no documentation. He had 2 folded pieces of paper in his inside pocket, one old, one new, both crayon. The presiding council member, a Velthari diplomat he'd already mispronounced twice, formally opened the proceedings. The charges, if you could call them that. The Queen had operated outside the council's knowledge, had suppressed an intelligence investigation, had concealed a relationship with a member of a formerly hostile species, had compromised her judgment. The charges as read aloud sounded very reasonable. That was the thing about Drav Ohen's arguments. They always sounded very reasonable. Reasonable was the whole strategy. Drav was invited to present his case. He stood, he spoke at length. He spoke about the war, about what the war had cost, about the importance of clear-eyed policy in the aftermath of conflict, about the danger of letting personal sentiment, however understandable, however human, influence decisions that affected billions of lives. He spoke about the Queen's decision to suppress the intelligence file, about what that concealment suggested regarding her judgment, about the responsibility of the Council to maintain oversight. He never raised his voice. He never said anything technically untrue. He was extraordinarily good at this. When he finished, he sat back down and glanced at his tablet again. The presiding diplomat asked if there were responses. Varen spoke first. 3 sentences. Formal, controlled. She acknowledged the Council's right to inquiry. She maintained the decisions were hers to make, and she stood by them. She said she would address the specifics in turn. Then the presiding diplomat turned to the floor. There is a request, he said, from the human delegation. A member of the delegation involved in the events under discussion has requested the opportunity to address the chamber. Silence. Then murmuring. A lot of murmuring. The specific frequency of rooms recalibrating their expectations. The chamber will hear the request, Drav Ohen said. Smooth, immediate. Like he'd expected this and had already decided how to use it. Kale looked at him across the room. Drav Ohen looked back with the composed expression of a man offering you enough rope. Fine. Kale walked to the center of the floor. He stood in the position designed to make people feel exposed. He was not an orator. He had never given a speech in his life that he would describe as good. He had given field briefings fast, factual, designed for people who needed information quickly and would act on it immediately. He had delivered news to families, slow, careful, designed for people who were about to have the ground removed from under them. Those were the 2 modes he had. This was neither. So he did the only other thing he knew how to do. He told the truth. My name is Kale Morrow, he said. 8 years Combat Medical Earth Defense Corps. Honorable discharge 4 years ago. Currently operating a cargo transport out of Kestrel Station. I am not a diplomat. I have no prepared statement. The room waited. 5 years ago, I was on Suradek, he said. My ship had a broken coupling, and I was working odd jobs to pay for parts. I was eating dinner when a transport came down in the market. I heard it, I went out. Simple. He kept it simple. I am going to tell you exactly what I saw and exactly what I did, and I'm going to ask you to understand that there was nothing complicated about any of it. He described the fire, the breach in the hull, the smoke, the woman on the floor, the child behind the collapsed seat. He spoke in the same tone he used for field reports, factual, sequential, present tense, in the way that things stayed present tense when you'd lived them hard enough. The child was approximately 4 years old. She was pinned. She was terrified. She was alone in the dark with a fire getting closer. He stopped for a moment, not for effect, because this was the part that still lived somewhere specific in his chest. She looked at me, he said. She didn't understand my language. She didn't know who I was. She was scared, and she was alone, and she looked at me, and she stopped screaming. The room was silent. Because she decided to trust me, he said. A 4-year-old decided in that moment that I was safe, and I want to be very clear about what that cost her. He looked up at the tiered seating. Nothing. It cost her nothing, because I was safe. He let that sit. I carried them both out. The woman, the queen, though I didn't know that yet, over one shoulder. The child against my chest. The ship's engine went on the way out. I hit the ground. They were okay. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out the 2 folded pieces of paper, held them up. Before I walked away, the child put something in my hand, a drawing. I didn't know what it was. I kept it because I didn't have a category for it, and I have a rule about things I can't categorize. I hold on to them until I understand them. He placed both drawings on the floor in front of him, open, visible from the tiered seats. The first one she drew when she was 4. The second one she drew this morning. The same subject, practice for 5 years. He looked at Drav Ohen. High Consul Ohen has described me as a representative of a formerly hostile species. That is accurate. Humans fought in the Valthari conflict. I was there. I know what we cost. He did not look away. I also know what I was doing that night in the market on Suradek. I wasn't representing a species. I wasn't making a diplomatic calculation. I wasn't building a relationship or establishing an alliance or pursuing any agenda that could be described in political terms. He paused. I heard a child crying in a burning ship, and I went in. The silence in the room was different from the silence at the beginning. Denser, more present. High Consul Ohen is concerned about the Queen's judgment, about her decision to suppress the investigation, about the implications of concealing this from the Council. Those are legitimate concerns. I'm not here to speak to those. He picked up the two drawings, folded them, put them back in his pocket. I'm here because a 9-year-old girl spent 5 years looking for the face of a stranger who carried her out of a fire, and she found it, and High Consul Ohen would like to use that fact as a weapon. He looked at Ohen directly. I don't think that's what it is. He stepped back. That's all I have. He walked back to the edge of the floor. The room did not immediately erupt. It stayed quiet in the specific way of a room that has received information and is still processing the implications. Drav Ohen rose. The chamber appreciates the human's testimony, he said, smooth, gracious, still holding all the rope. What we've heard is a compelling personal account. What we are discussing, however, is not personal accounts. It is the Queen's conduct as a head of state. He turned to face the center of the chamber, the full room. Her Majesty knew for 5 years, he said. She could have informed the Council. She chose not to, and the question this chamber must ask is simple. He paused. What else has she chosen not to tell us? It landed the way he'd intended it to land. Weighted, hanging. The kind of question that didn't need an answer to do its damage because the asking was already the damage. The murmuring in the room shifted quality. Kale stood at the edge of the floor and watched and thought, there it is. That's the move. That was always the move. Don't argue about the event. Argue about the concealment. Don't attack the Queen's decision. Attack her trustworthiness. Because once you've made someone's trustworthiness, the question, everything they say becomes suspect, including the truth. It was elegant. He hated how elegant it was. And then, a sound, small, clear, coming from the Cathari tiered section, from a seat near the edge of the second tier where the junior delegation members sat, a chair being pushed back, a small figure standing up. Soul, 9 years old, in her formal robes, with her worn notebook in her hands and her back absolutely straight, and her chin at an angle that Kale recognized not from 5 years ago, but from less than an hour ago in a service corridor when she'd sat next to him and told him with the calm certainty of someone who had already made her decision that he was the kind of person who went into burning ships. Every head in the room turned. Princess Soul, the presiding diplomat's voice uncertain. This is not protocol, does not. I know, she said, perfectly polite, completely unbothered. I would like to speak. The diplomat looked at Varen. Varen's face was still, very still. The specific stillness of a mother watching a child do something terrifying and correct, at the same time and understanding that she cannot stop it and should not try. The princess is a direct party to the events under discussion, said a voice from the human section. Lena Voss, firm and immediate. Under Article 7 of the Concordia Procedural Charter, any direct party may address the chamber. Silence. Drav Ohen said nothing, which was telling. He said nothing because he was recalculating, because a 9-year-old girl asking to speak was not a variable he had prepared for, because the room was watching, and the room which had been his room 30 seconds ago was now waiting. The chair recognizes Princess Soel of the Kithari sovereignty, the presiding diplomat said. She walked down. Slowly, not dramatically slowly, just at her own pace. Down the tiered steps and across the polished floor to the center position. The position designed for exposure. She stood in it like she'd been standing in difficult positions her whole life. which she had. She was 9. Everything is a difficult position when you're 9 and expected to be a future queen. She opened her notebook, looked at the page, then she looked up. High Consul Ohen said that the Queen's judgment was compromised by personal sentiment, she said. I want to address that. She had the room, completely. I am 9 years old, she said. I am not a diplomat. I'm not going to pretend to understand all the political considerations being discussed here. She looked directly at Drav Owen. But I understand what happened on Suradek 5 years ago. I was there. I remember it better than I remember almost anything. She looked down at the notebook. When I was 5 years old, she said, I started learning the human language. I started with one word. She found the page, held the book up so the front rows could see. Neighbor. In the human language, neighbor does not only mean someone who lives nearby. In the oldest uses of the word, it means anyone who needs help that you can give. She lowered the book. I learned this word first because I thought it explained what the human did that night. He didn't know us. We weren't his kind. We were representatives of a species that had not helped his people during their war. We had nothing to offer him. We were strangers in every way that mattered. She paused. And we needed help that he could give. Her voice was steady. Not the steadiness of someone suppressing feeling, the steadiness of someone who has felt the feeling all the way through and come out the other side of it, and is now simply stating what they found there. High Consul Ohin would like this chamber to believe that my mother's judgment is compromised because she felt gratitude towards someone who saved her life and her daughter's life. She tilted her head. I would like this chamber to consider what it would mean if gratitude were a disqualifying emotion for leadership. Drav Ohen shifted, just slightly. I have been studying human history for 4 years, Sol continued. High Consul Ohen's office approved extra study materials for me 2 years ago. Historical records. I found them very educational. She closed the notebook. I also found other records myself, from the other direction. She looked at the High Consul. Did you know that humans have been keeping records of their own mistakes for as long as they have been keeping records of anything, she said. They write down the things they did wrong. They study them. They build institutions specifically designed to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. They are extremely committed to the project of not repeating themselves. A pause. They are not always successful, but they are committed. Something moved through the room. Not sound, just a shift in collective posture. The specific physical language of hundreds of beings updating their assessments simultaneously. I am not here to defend all humans, she said. I am here to say what I know to be true about one human, and what I know is this. She straightened her already straight back. He ran into a burning ship for us. He carried us out. He put me down and he said something I didn't understand, and I could see in his face that he meant it, that we were safe. And then he walked away. She found Kale at the edge of the floor, looked at him directly. He walked away because that was just the thing he did, not the brave thing, not the heroic thing, just the thing. She looked back at the chamber. I have been thinking about that for 5 years. What it means that someone can exist in the world in that way. Who helps because help is needed? Who asks for nothing because there is nothing to ask for? She put the notebook back in her pocket. High Consul Ohen says my mother's judgment is compromised. I say her judgment is working exactly as it should. She recognized something real. She didn't know what to do with it, none of us did. But she recognized it. She paused. I think that is what good judgment looks like. Not certainty, recognition. She was done. She stepped back. The room was full of something that had no diplomatic name. Then Queen Varen stood. She rose from her seat in the Cathari section without ceremony, without announcement. She simply stood, and the room responded the way it always responded to her standing with attention. With the particular alertness of beings who understood that something was about to be said that would matter. She descended to the floor, walked to the center, stood next to her daughter. She looked at Drav Ohen for a long moment. He held her gaze. This was a man who had held Queen's gazes for 20 years. He was good at it. High Consul Ohen has raised legitimate procedural concerns, she said. Formal, clear. I will address them. She reached into her robe, withdrew a data device. The High Council was not informed of the intelligence investigation. That is accurate. What the High Council may not know is why. She held up the device. Because the intelligence investigation was not the first document in this file. The first document is a request, filed 4 years and 9 months ago, filed by the High Consul's office, requesting that all cross-species intelligence operations involving human nationals be routed through his office for review before reaching the Queen. Silence. Total silence. I received this request. I did not comply with it, and I did not inform the Council of either the request or my non-compliance, which was an error, I acknowledge. She looked at the chamber. What I should have said at the time and what I am saying now is that I declined because the request was itself a breach of established protocol. The High Consul's office does not have oversight authority over Crown intelligence operations. The request was not filed through proper channels. And I believed correctly, as it turns out, that it was filed specifically to intercept information that the High Consul wished to control before I could act on it. Drav Ohen's face, still, but differently still. The kind of stillness that was no longer composure. The kind that was calculation. I have, in the 4 years since, Varen continued, maintained a secondary investigation. Quiet, independent, into why the High Consul wanted oversight of human intelligence, into how he was using that oversight in the operations I allowed to proceed through his office. She set the data device down on the central floor. That investigation is complete. She looked at him. 20 years ago, High Consul Ohen inherited a political position that required for its maintenance a population that believed humans were a threat. The war provided that belief naturally. When the war ended, the belief required maintenance. She kept her voice level, factual, the exact same register Cale had used. His office approved educational materials for my daughter that emphasized human military failures. His office maintained a network of advisors across our educational system who reinforced a specific narrative. His office filed procedural barriers to any diplomatic contact between Cathari citizens and human nationals for 11 years. One breath. He did not do this because he believed humans were dangerous. She picked up the data device, extended it to the presiding diplomat. He did this because he believed that a Cathari population afraid of humans was a population that needed his counsel, and a Cathari queen grateful to a human. She didn't look at Cale, but the whole room felt the direction of the thought was a queen who might question whether she needed it. The presiding diplomat took the device. Dravo Hen stood, Your Majesty. The documentation is complete, she said. The council may review it at their convenience. I have nothing further to add. She walked back to her seat. Dravo Hen stood in the center of the chamber, and for the first time in the hearing, maybe for the first time in 20 years, he had nothing immediately available. It was not dramatic. That was the thing. It wasn't a moment of public collapse or visible defeat. He was too controlled for that. He sat back down. He placed his hands on the table in front of him. He looked at the data device that was now being examined by the presiding diplomat and 3 council members. He looked like a man who had understood in a single moment that the board he'd been playing on for 20 years had been playing a different game entirely. The formal proceedings took 4 more hours. Cale sat through all of them. He sat at the edge of the human delegation section and watched the procedural mechanisms of galactic diplomacy process what had just happened. It was slow. It was meticulous. It was honestly a little boring in the way that the important machinery of governance was always a little boring, because boring was actually the goal. Boring meant it was working. Exciting governance was usually a disaster. Dravoen's proposed inquiry was tabled pending review of the Queen's documentation. Dravoen's procedural authority was suspended pending the same review. The Concordia Summit was not dissolved. These 3 things happened in that order, and Kyle watched all of it with the patient attention of a man who had learned long ago that the most important moments in history were rarely interesting while they were happening. Lena Voss appeared next to him partway through the final hour, sat down, said nothing for a while. Good speech, she said finally. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't bad for not being a speech. Thank you. She was quiet again. Then, you knew she was going to do that. With the file. I didn't know anything. You suspected. He thought about Sol in the corridor, about what she'd said about Owen, about one-sided information and what it was usually trying to do, about a 9-year-old who had been reading comprehensively since she was 5 and had drawn the right conclusion years before the adults around her had. I suspected, he said. How? Because someone told me to pay attention. Lena looked at him for a moment, then looked away. She's remarkable. Yes. The princess. Yes. You know this gets complicated from here. Most things do. You're going to be a figure. Historically, this moment is going to be in the record. He didn't say anything. Kale, I heard you. Are you okay with that? He thought about corner tables, about gray soup, about the quiet of deep space and the particular freedom of being nobody in particular, moving things from one place to another. He thought about a drawer with a folded drawing in it that he'd never thrown away. I'll figure it out, he said. The proceedings closed, the delegations dispersed, the corridors of Concordia filled with the particular energy of a situation that had been tense for hours, releasing all at once conversation and movement, and the sounds of beings processing something significant in the way their species process things. Kale walked, not toward anything specific, just walking, the way he always did when his mind needed more space than his body was currently occupying. He found the observation gallery, the same one from before, long window, stars, the bench placed there for exactly this kind of moment. He sat down. The stars were the same as they'd been an hour ago, a day ago, 5 years ago. Stars were deeply unimpressed by galactic politics. He had always found this comforting. He sat with his hands loose on his knees. He thought about a lot of things. He thought about 12 names. He read them in his head. All 12. In order. All the way through. No skipping. He hadn't done that in a while. He did it now because it seemed right. Because something had shifted somewhere in the past few hours, and it felt like the kind of shift that deserved acknowledgement. He didn't know exactly what had shifted, just that the weight of it was different. Not gone, not resolved, just different. He heard footsteps, small ones. He didn't turn around. You followed me again, he said. I knew where you'd be, Sol said. You're very predictable. I'm going to take that as a compliment. She sat down next to him. Same bench, same window, same stars. Different version of the conversation they'd had before. She was quiet for a moment, looking out. I didn't ask permission to speak, she said. In the chamber. I noticed. My mother is going to have thoughts about that. Probably. Several thoughts, organized thoughts, delivered in a particular tone. He glanced at her. Are you worried? No. She thought about it. Yes, but the right kind of worried. The kind that means you did the thing anyway. He nodded. They were quiet. Outside, the stars moved the way they always moved. Slower than visible. Slower than patience. Can I ask you something, she said. You have a way of making that not really a question. Can I ask you something? Yes. She looked at him sideways. Did you know my name before today? He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. She blinked. How? I looked it up after Suradek. He looked at the stars. Not right away. Took me a while to find the right records. But I found them. Why? He turned and looked at her, directly, the way she always looked at things without decoration, without flinching. Because I wanted to know if you were okay, he said. I walked away. That was the right call at the time. But I walked away not knowing. So I found out. She processed this. When did you look? About 8 months after. And I found out that the princess of the Cathari sovereignty had sustained no serious injuries in the Suradek transport accident and had been released from medical monitoring within 48 hours. That's a very official way to say I was fine. You were fine. She looked back out the window. Did you feel better after you found out? He thought about it honestly. The way she always made you think about things honestly, whether you wanted to or not. Yes, some. Not completely. No, not completely. He paused. I still thought about walking away. But you found out anyway. Yes. She nodded slowly, like this was information she was filing somewhere careful. I didn't know you looked, she said. I know. I spent 5 years looking and you found out in 8 months and didn't. She stopped, recalibrated. You could have come. I could have. Why didn't you? He looked at his hands, the rough ones, the scarred ones, the hands of someone who had spent years doing work that left marks. Because you were fine, he said. And I didn't know what I would be walking into, and I have a habit of not creating situations I can't see the edges of. That's an extremely cautious way to live. I know. It kept you from some things. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment, then not looking at him. I'm glad you came to the summit. Lena Voss is very persuasive. I'm glad she is. The stars outside this window were doing what stars did, being enormous and patient and completely indifferent to everything happening inside the station, and also somehow in that indifference oddly comforting. Cale had spent a lot of years looking at stars through ship windows. He had a theory that the comfort was in the scale that looking at something vast enough made your own problems assume their correct proportions. His problems tonight felt correctly proportioned. Manageable. Not small, but manageable. What happens next, Soul said. Not a question exactly. More like thinking out loud. The summit continues. Agreements get made. People go home. And you. I'll go home too. The way farmer. The way farmer. She was quiet. My mother, she said, is going to propose something. Officially, through proper channels. Because she does things through proper channels now, apparently. Or she's trying to. What kind of something? A formal role. Cultural liaison. Bridge between delegations. Something that would involve you staying. She glanced at him. Probably for a long time. He looked at the window. What do you think I should do? He said. She seemed surprised by the question. Then she smiled. Just slightly. The small smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to be asked something real. I think, she said carefully, that you have been running since the war ended. Not fast, not dramatically, just consistently, in small ships, in small jobs, and corner tables. He didn't argue. And I think, she said, that running works until it doesn't. And I think maybe it just stopped working. Because you're still here. He was still here. That was true. He'd had opportunities to be somewhere else today. Plenty of them. The conversation with the delegation advisors. The hearing chamber. The moment after the proceedings when he could have quietly collected his bag and rebooked his transport back to Kestrel Station. He had chosen each time not to take them. And he was still here. In this observation gallery, on this bench, next to a 9-year-old girl who had spent 5 years learning his language so she could talk to him, and had then stood up in a room full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy and said the word neighbor like it explained everything. Because maybe it did. Behind them, footsteps, slower ones, more deliberate. They both turned. Queen Varen stood in the doorway of the observation gallery. She was out of her formal robes. Still composed, she was always composed. It was architectural, but without the summit's ceremonial weight around her. She looked like someone who had been in a room for a very long time and had recently left it. She looked at her daughter first. Soul met her gaze. Something passed between them, the specific wordless communication of a mother and child, who were very different from each other and very alike in the ways that mattered. Then Varen looked at Cale. He stood. She held up a hand. Please sit. He sat. She crossed to the bench, did not sit on it, stood beside it looking out the window, at the stars. She speaks well, Varen said, meaning Soul. Yes, Cale said. She learned that herself. Nobody taught her. A pause. I sometimes think I gave her the raw materials and she built the rest without the plans. That's usually how the best things get built, he said. Varen was quiet. Soul was quiet. Kael was quiet. The three of them looked at the stars through the observation window, and the stars looked back with the magnificent indifference of things that had been there long before any of them, and would be there long after. I owe you an explanation, Varen said finally. You don't. I do. She looked at him. I knew about you. 4 months after the accident, I had your name and your ship and your photograph. I could have contacted you. You closed the investigation. Yes. Why? She looked back out the window. Because I have spent 31 years making sure that no one could use my vulnerabilities against me, she said. And I had just nearly died, and you had walked into a burning ship to pull me out, and then disappeared without asking for anything. And she stopped, reassembled. I didn't know what to do with someone who wasn't trying to use me. I didn't have a protocol for it. He nodded. So I closed the investigation, she said, and I told myself it was the right decision. A pause. It was not the right decision. It was an understandable one. Those are not the same thing. No, he said. They're not. She looked at him for a moment. Then something in her expression just slightly released. Some pressure that had been maintaining itself. Soul told me she said 6 months ago that she intended to find you at the summit. He looked at Soul. Soul looked at the stars. She was very confident, Varen said. She said she would know your face anywhere, that she had practiced it sufficiently. A pause that might on someone else have been the pause before something like humor. She was correct. She usually is, Kale said. Yes, it is both her greatest quality and her most exhausting one. Soul still wasn't looking at them, but she was smiling, very slightly. The smile of someone letting two other people have a conversation and not interfering, which was itself a kind of interference. The proposal I intend to make, Varen said, formally, through proper channels. Soul mentioned something. It would not be a small commitment. I understood that. It would involve, she seemed to be choosing words with the precision of someone who had learned that imprecise words became problems later, a sustained presence, over time, not a political position, not a formal title, something more like, she paused, a continued conversation. He looked at her, she looked at him. I am proposing, she said very precisely, that you stay, not as a symbol, not as a representative, as yourself, in whatever capacity that means worked out over time. That's an unusual offer. You are an unusual situation. He looked out the window, the stars, still there, still unimpressed. He thought about the wayfarmer sitting in the secondary bay. Broken coupling, secondary drive that needed work. He'd deal with that. He thought about the small drawer under the navigation console. Empty now. Both drawings in his jacket pocket. He thought about the rule: hold on to things you can't categorize until you understand them. He thought he might finally understand. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out the two drawings, looked at them side by side in the observation gallery's quiet light. The 4-year-old's crayon figures on worn paper, two shapes, one tall, one small, hands connected, and the 9-year-old's careful rendering of a face practiced for 5 years. Brown hair going gray, tired eyes that were somehow kind. Same subject, 5 years apart. He folded them together, put them back. I'll need to sort out the wayfarmer, he said. Of course. It's not in great shape. We have excellent engineers. I'm also not easy to have around, I'm told. I am the queen of an interstellar sovereignty, Varen said. I have managed more difficult situations. I eat at corner tables. Then we will ensure the corner tables are good ones. Soul made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. The sound of someone trying not to make a sound and not entirely succeeding. Kyle looked at her. She looked at him with those remarkable eyes, the same eyes from the smoke and the dark and the fire 5 years ago on a moon he'd been stuck on by accident. From a very bad night that had turned into this. Into a hearing chamber and a 9-year-old standing up when she wasn't supposed to, and 2 folded drawings in an inside pocket, and stars through a window, and an unexpected conversation about corner tables with a queen. Okay, he said. Okay, Varen said. Okay. He looked at her. We can figure out what it means. I'm not in a hurry. Neither am I. Soul stood up. She stretched, the unself-conscious whole-body stretch of a 9-year-old who has been sitting still for as long as she intended to. She gathered her robes. I should probably let someone know where I am, she said. There is almost certainly a search. Almost certainly, Varen agreed. I'll go. She looked at Kale. You'll be here in the morning. I'll be here in the morning. She nodded, like a contract, like a thing decided. Then she walked back through the observation gallery door, and her footsteps faded down the corridor, and then it was just the two of them. Kale and Varen, and the stars. They stood there for a moment, not talking, not needing to. She drew your face, Varen said quietly, every week for 5 years. I know. She was very serious about it, the way she was serious about everything she cared about. A pause. She cared about this more than anything. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make it smaller. Thank you, Varen said. Not formal, not queenly, just true. For what you did, and for today, and for, she stopped, for staying. Thank you for the corner tables, he said. She looked at him for a moment, and then, for the first time, she laughed. It was brief and quiet, and it made her look just for a second like someone who had not been a queen for very long at all. She composed herself, moved toward the door, stopped at the threshold. Get some rest, she said. I will. She left. Kale sat back down on the bench, looked at the stars. He put his hand on the outside of his jacket, over the pocket, over the 2 drawings folded together inside it, the 4-year-old's crayon marks and the 9-year-old's careful lines. He sat with the stars for a while. He thought about the list of 12 names. He read them quietly in his head, the way he always did. All 12, in order. He had read them for 4 years as a kind of penance. Tonight they felt different, not lighter, not gone, just held differently. Like things you carry not because you owe them, but because they were part of you and always would be, and that was all right. He thought about gray soup and corner tables and a broken coupling, and the way a ship sounded when it was trying its best and falling slightly short. He thought about a child who had pressed a piece of paper into his hand in the middle of a disaster, not knowing why, just knowing she didn't want him to disappear completely. He thought about the word neighbor, about what it meant when you stripped away the geography and the familiarity and the shared history and got down to the thing underneath. Anyone who needs help that you can give. He had spent 4 years moving cargo, keeping his head down, staying in corners, trying to make himself small enough that the universe would leave him alone. The universe had not cooperated. He was sitting in an observation gallery on the largest diplomatic station ever constructed, with 2 crayon drawings in his pocket and an agreement loose undefined, worked out over time, to stay somewhere he had never planned to be, which was, he thought, probably fine. He had never planned very far ahead. He had planned as far as the next port, the next job, the next bowl of gray soup at the next corner table. And now here he was. And he was still here. And he did not think about leaving.